The house was eerily quiet when I got home that evening. Normally, Jane would be in the kitchen, humming a tune while preparing dinner, or lounging on the couch, her laughter filling the room as she scrolled through videos. But that day, the silence hit me like a wall. Something felt off. I dropped my bag by the door and called out, "Jane?" No response. I checked the living room, empty. The kitchen, pristine, untouched. That's when I noticed it. Her suitcase was gone. I tried to brush it off. She'd mentioned the girls' trip weeks ago, hadn't she? I could even hear her voice in my head, laughing as she assured me it was just a weekend getaway with her friends. But as I stood there in the middle of our quiet house, something gnawed at me, something I couldn't shake. I walked to the bedroom, looking for some sign, some note she might have left. But instead, I found something else. Her laptop, carelessly left open on the desk. Normally, she was meticulous. Passwords, locks, privacy. But this time, it was as if she'd forgotten everything. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But curiosity, no, instinct, got the better of me. The moment I sat down and moved the cursor, I knew I was stepping into territory I might not come back from. And what I saw, I wasn't ready for it. Messages. Hundreds of them. I scrolled through, my stomach twisting with every line. "Can't wait to see you. Last weekend was amazing. I miss you." The words blurred together as I realized these weren't just friendly exchanges. The timestamps were recent, some sent just days ago. And the sender? A name I'd never seen before, Brian. I tried to make sense of it, my mind racing. Who was Brian? Was this a joke? Some prank? I wanted to believe it wasn't real, but the more I read, the more undeniable it became. She wasn't just talking to him. She was planning to see him. This girl's trip was a lie. My hands trembled as I clicked on a photo she'd sent him. It was her, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, carefree, glowing. My heart sank. The timestamp was from her last work trip, a work trip I'd supported, encouraged even, thinking I was being the good husband. At that moment, everything around me faded. The life we'd built, the trust we'd shared. It all seemed like a mirage crumbling before my eyes. I wanted answers, but I didn't even know where to begin. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again, this time texting, "Where are you? Call me." No reply. Hours passed, and with every minute, the weight in my chest grew heavier. The house, once our sanctuary, now felt foreign, cold, empty. I sat on the couch, staring at the screen, waiting for her name to pop up. But it didn't. When midnight rolled around, I couldn't sit still any longer. I grabbed my keys and left. I don't even know where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. But no matter where I went, her voice, her laughter, her lies, they followed me. I parked the car on the side of an empty road and leaned back in my seat, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. How had we come to this? Where had everything started to fall apart? It's strange, looking back now. If you told me this would happen the day I met Jane, I wouldn't have believed you. I still remember that day so clearly. She had this energy about her, this spark that drew people in. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and from the moment she laughed at one of my dumb jokes, I knew I wanted her in my life. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. Everyone gravitated toward her, but somehow, she made me feel like I was the only one who mattered. Our relationship moved fast, maybe too fast. Within 6 months, we were living together. Within a year, we were married. At the time, it felt like destiny. I used to think, when you know, but maybe I was just too blind, or too naive, to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. I remember our first year of marriage. It was like living in a dream. We traveled, stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, and made promises about the future, kids, a house, growing old together. But somewhere along the line, things started to change. And the worst part is, I couldn't even tell you when it began. Maybe it was the late nights at work, or the weekends she spent out with her friends while I stayed home, convincing myself I was being supportive, that it was healthy for her to have her space. I told myself it was normal. After all, Every couple needs independence, right? Still, there were moments that stuck with me, moments I should have paid more attention to. Like the time she went out for drinks with coworkers and didn't come home until 3 in the morning. I asked her about it the next day, and she laughed it off, saying they'd lost track of time. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, and I trusted her. There was another time when I found a receipt in her purse for a dinner for two at a restaurant we'd never been to. I asked her about it, and she told me it was for her and a friend, Sarah. She even showed me a photo of them from that night, smiling with cocktails in hand. It seemed innocent enough at the time, but now? Now I can't help but wonder if Sarah was ever even there. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I started to feel the distance between us, but I know it was there. It was in the way she stopped laughing at my jokes, the way she turned her phone screen away when I walked into the room, the way she always seemed just a little too distracted when we were together. I'd ask her if everything was okay, and she'd smile and say, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" And like an idiot, I believed her. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. There were too many nights where I'd wake up to an empty bed, only to find her sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone with a look I couldn't quite read. When I'd ask her what she was doing, she'd always have an excuse: work emails, a late-night chat with a friend, or just couldn't sleep. I let it slide every time, because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy. Looking back, I realize I ignored every warning sign, every gut feeling that told me something wasn't right. I didn't want to believe she was capable of hurting me like this. I didn't want to believe that the woman I'd built my life around, the woman I loved, could betray me in the worst possible way. But the truth is, I didn't just ignore the signs. I rationalized them. I made excuses for her behavior because it was easier than facing the possibility that my marriage wasn't as perfect as I wanted it to be. I told myself she was just stressed, that work was taking a toll on her, that she'd come back to me when things settled down. And yet, even as I convinced myself of these lies, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the doubt. It was there in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me every time she canceled plans, every time she spent hours on her phone, every time she smiled at me in that way that didn't quite reach her eyes. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Maybe it's because I need to say it out loud, to make sense of how I ended up here, parked on the side of a dark road, questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. Or maybe it's because, deep down, I always knew this moment was coming. I just didn't want to see it. Before we continue, a quick reminder: 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying this story and want to support us, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are listening from. We'd love to hear from you. That was the truth, wasn't it? Ignorance is easier than confrontation. Denial is more comfortable than the cold slap of reality. But now, there was no escaping it. Every lie she told, every excuse she made, it all came crashing down on me like a wave I couldn't outrun. I drove aimlessly for hours that night. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only thing keeping me grounded. My mind was a mess, replaying every interaction, every moment that now felt tainted. The text messages on her laptop weren't just words. They were proof that my life wasn't what I thought it was. When I finally got home, the house felt colder than before. I sat on the couch, staring at the laptop. The messages were still there, glowing on the screen like an accusation. My chest felt tight as I scrolled through them again, reading every word, every sickening detail of her conversations with Brian. There were plans in those messages, plans they'd made for the trip she was on right now. "Can't wait to spend the weekend with you," she'd written. "I'll tell Jason it's just the girls. He won't suspect a thing." The words stung like a slap to the face. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she'd gone through with it anyway. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her smile, the way she used to look at me before all of this. And then I'd see the messages, her betrayal etched into my memory. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't sit around and let this happen. I needed answers. I started small. Her phone was still synced to our shared account, and I used it to track her location. She was in a city 2 hours away, at a hotel. My stomach churned as I stared at the little blue on the map. Part of me wanted to get in the car and drive there, confront her, demand to know the truth. But another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew I needed to be careful. Instead, I started digging. I went through our bank statements, looking for anything unusual. And there it was, charges I didn't recognize. Hotel bookings, expensive dinners, gifts from stores I'd never heard her mention. It was all right there, in black and white, like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I remembered the receipts I'd found in her purse months ago, the ones I'd dismissed as nothing. Now they felt like breadcrumbs, leading me straight to the truth. She hadn't been careless. She'd been confident. Confident that I'd never look, never question, never put the pieces together. And for a long time, she was right. But now I couldn't stop. I opened her email account and started searching. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. More messages, more evidence. Plane tickets she'd booked with Brian's name on them. Photos they'd exchanged. Their faces lit up with happiness that should have been ours. Each discovery felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. As the day went on, my anger grew. It wasn't just about what she'd done. It was about how easily she'd lied to me, how she'd taken everything we'd built and thrown it away. I thought about every time I defended her, every time I'd ignored my instincts because I wanted to believe in her, in us. And now, all of it felt like a joke. By the time the sun started to set, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called my best friend, Eric. He'd always been the one I turned to when things got tough, and I needed his perspective. I told him everything, from the messages to the receipts to the hotel she was at right now. Eric was quiet for a long time after I finished. Finally, he said, "Jason, you need to be smart about this. Don't do anything rash. Get your evidence together, protect yourself, and then deal with her. But don't let your anger make the decisions for you." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. He was right. As much as I wanted to storm into that hotel and confront her, I knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. If anything, it would give her the chance to turn the tables, to make me look like the bad guy. I needed a plan. That night, I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of the messages, saved copies of the emails, and printed out the bank statements. I even set up a camera in the house, just in case she came back and tried to twist the story. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. But the more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about the affair. It was about control, about taking back the power she'd stolen from me. She thought she could lie to me, cheat on me, and get away with it. She thought I'd just roll over and let it happen. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I stayed up late into the night, piecing everything together. By the time I was done, I had a folder full of evidence that painted a picture she couldn't deny. And as I looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of what she'd done. It all fueled something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. Clarity. A fire that burned away the fog of doubt and indecision. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It wasn't enough to confront her. I needed to ensure there were no loose ends, no way for her to twist the truth or turn this around on me. If she wanted to play games, then I'd play too. Only I wasn't going to lose. I started by contacting my lawyer. He'd handled our finances when we bought the house, and I trusted him to guide me through this mess. When I explained the situation, he didn't waste time with sympathy. Instead, he gave me a checklist: secure financial accounts, document everything, and prepare for a legal battle. By midday, I was at the bank. I sat across from the manager, calmly explaining that I needed to withdraw all funds from our joint account. When she hesitated, I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I have reason to believe my wife is committing financial fraud," I said, sliding a copy of the suspicious transactions across the desk. That was all it took. Within minutes, the account was drained, and the money was safely in my personal savings. As I walked out of the bank, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about taking back control, about protecting what was mine. For so long, I'd felt powerless, but now Now I was the one holding the cards. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. Her location hadn't changed. She was still at the hotel. I'd spent hours imagining how the confrontation would play out, but nothing felt right. Should I call her? Show up unannounced? Part of me wanted to catch her in the act, to see her face when she realized the game was over. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, wanted her to feel the same helplessness, the same despair I'd felt. I made my decision. I grabbed the folder of evidence, the bank statements, the printed emails, and the screenshots. I placed them neatly in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name on the front. Then I picked up a pen and wrote a note to go along with it. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, but they carried the weight of everything I needed to say. Jane, you thought you could break me. You thought I wouldn't find out. But I did, and now it's over. Don't bother coming home. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and the papers are on their way. Consider this my parting gift. Jason. I slipped the envelope into my bag and headed for the hotel. The drive felt surreal, like I was caught in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Every mile brought me closer to the confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my hands were shaking, but my resolve was stronger than ever. I walked into the lobby, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of her. I didn't see her, but I recognized the name Brian from the emails. He was standing by the elevators, laughing with a group of people. My jaw clenched as I watched him. The man who'd stolen my wife, who'd ruined my marriage. I wanted to march over and confront him right then and there, but I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for anger. It was the time for precision. I approached the front desk and asked for her room number, using the same calm, authoritative tone I'd used at the bank. The clerk hesitated, but when I gave them a plausible excuse, I'm her husband, and she's expecting me, they relented. Room 418. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I stood in front of her door, the envelope in my hand, and took a deep breath. This was it. No turning back now. I knocked. Once. Twice. On the third knock, the door opened. She stood there, her face pale as she registered the sight of me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I held out the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's everything you've been hiding," I said, my voice steady. "And everything you've lost." Her hands shook as she took the envelope, her eyes darting between me and the hallway, as if she expected someone to come to her rescue. But there was no one. Just me, her, and the truth she couldn't escape. "Jason, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't. I don't want to hear it. You made your choices, Jane. Now you can live with them." I turned and walked away, ignoring her calls as she begged me to come back, to talk, to give her a chance to explain. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt free. Not just from her lies, but from the weight I'd been carrying. The endless questions, the sleepless nights, the constant second-guessing of myself. As I walked out of that hotel and into the crisp night air, I took the deepest breath I could manage, as if I was finally letting my lungs fill after holding my breath for far too long. But freedom, as I quickly learned, doesn't come without its cost. The silence in my car on the drive home felt different now. Before, it was heavy with doubt and suspicion. Now, it was hollow, a void where my life with Jane used to be. I tried turning on the radio, letting the music fill the space, but every song seemed to echo my emotions back at me. So, I drove in silence, letting the weight of everything settle in. When I got home, the house felt colder than ever. Her things were still there. Her shoes by the door, her coat hanging in the hallway, the framed photo of us smiling on our wedding day. I stared at that photo for a long time, my mind replaying the moment it was taken. The way she looked at me that day, the way I thought she loved me. Was it real? Or had she been pretending even then? I wanted to smash it, to throw it against the wall, and let the glass shatter like my life had. But instead, I placed it face down on the table and walked away. There was no point in destroying it. It wouldn't undo what had happened, wouldn't erase the memories or the pain. It was just a picture, just like she was just a person, someone I thought I knew but didn't. The next few days were a blur. I stayed home from work, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. I felt sick to my core. The betrayal had seeped into every part of me, and no amount of sleep or food or distraction could shake it. I barely left the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, hoping for something, anything, to take my mind off her. But every notification, every text, every email felt like a reminder. Friends asking if I was okay, family wondering why Jane hadn't been around. I didn't know how to answer them. What was I supposed to say? That my wife had cheated on me, lied to me, and destroyed everything we'd built together? The words felt too big, too heavy to say out loud. And then there was her. She called, of course, dozens of times. Every time her name lit up my screen, my stomach turned. I couldn't bring myself to answer, to hear her voice, to listen to whatever excuses or apologies she had prepared. She left voicemails, but I didn't listen to those either. I didn't need to. I already knew what she'd say. Jason, I'm sorry. Please, let's talk. I can explain. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we fix this? Please don't throw everything away. Every message felt like another twist of the knife. Fix this? How do you fix something so completely broken? How do you rebuild trust when it's been ground into the dirt? The truth was, I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to hear her excuses or feel her tears on my shoulder as she begged for forgiveness. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to know the emptiness, the betrayal, the loss. But even as I stewed in my anger, there was another emotion creeping in. Grief. Not just for the marriage I'd lost, but for the future I'd imagined. The house we'd planned to renovate together. The trips we dreamed of taking. The family we talked about starting. All of it, gone in an instant, replaced by a reality I hadn't asked for and didn't want. One night, I sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the divorce papers I'd received from my lawyer. They were straightforward, clinical, devoid of the emotion that had consumed me for weeks. All I had to do was sign them, and it would be over. But as I picked up the pen, my hand froze. It wasn't because I had doubts. I didn't. It was because signing them felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that she'd won, that she'd taken something from me I could never get back. Eventually, I signed them. One quick scrawl of my name, and it was done. I sat there for a long time after, the pen still in my hand, the papers staring back at me like a challenge. This was it. The end of us. The end of the life I thought I'd have. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something else. The next morning, I woke up early for the first time in weeks. I made coffee, opened the windows, and let the sunlight flood the room. It felt strange, almost foreign, to let light back into my life. But as I stood there, sipping my coffee and watching the world go on outside, I realized something. I wasn't broken. Not completely. I was still here, still standing. And maybe that was enough for now. I wasn't sure what the future held or how I would rebuild, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. It was fragile, like a flame in the wind, but it was there, and that was something. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were different. I started focusing on the small things, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the feel of the sun on my face during a walk, the sound of birds outside my window. It felt strange at first to find joy in such simple moments, but those moments became my anchors, pulling me out of the storm I'd been trapped in. I began to reclaim my space, little by little. Her things were still in the house, reminders of a life I no longer wanted. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty getting rid of them, but as I packed her clothes into boxes and took down the photos from the walls, I felt something else, relief. Each box I taped shut, each empty frame I set aside, felt like a step forward, like I was clearing out more than just the physical clutter. I was making room for something new. One evening, I stood in what used to be our bedroom, now stripped of anything that reminded me of her. The walls were bare, the bed was just a mattress with plain sheets, but it didn't feel empty, it felt open. For the first time, I could imagine filling it with things that were mine, that represented me, and the life I wanted to create. Not long after, I decided to take a trip. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few days in the mountains, away from the city and the noise. I wanted to clear my head, to remind myself of who I was before all of this. The first morning there, I hiked to a secluded spot overlooking a valley, the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. As I sat there, the cool air on my skin and the world stretching out before me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. That trip became the first of many small steps toward rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during my marriage. At first, I was hesitant to share what had happened, but when I finally did, their support was overwhelming. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people who cared about me, who wanted to see me thrive. I also threw myself into work, not as a distraction, but as a way to focus my energy on something productive. For years, I'd put my own ambitions on hold to support Jane's goals, to build a life around her dreams. Now, I had the chance to rediscover what I wanted, what made me feel alive. And as I poured myself into new projects, I found a renewed sense of purpose. But the most important change came from within. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before. At first, it felt strange to sit across from a stranger and pour out my heart, but over time, it became a lifeline. My therapist helped me see things I hadn't before: the patterns in my relationship, the ways I'd ignored my own needs, the fears that had kept me from standing up for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One day, during a session, my therapist asked me, "What does happiness look like for you now, Jason?" Not what it looked like before, not what someone else told you it should be. What does it look like for you? The question stopped me in my tracks. I didn't have an answer then, but it planted a seed, one that would grow over the weeks and months that followed. I began to redefine happiness on my own terms. It wasn't about grand gestures or big milestones anymore. It was about the quiet moments, the laughter of a friend over dinner, the satisfaction of finishing a project at work, the warmth of a good book on a rainy evening. It was about learning to be content with myself, to find joy in my own company. And slowly, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, like an old scar that no longer hurt to touch. And as I looked ahead, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: excitement. Not for any specific plan or goal, but for the possibility of what could be. One morning, I received an email from Jane. It was short, just a few lines. "Jason, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. I didn't. I just didn't need to anymore. Her apology wasn't for me. It was for her. And I didn't need her words to find closure. I'd already found it on my own. As the months passed, I continued to build a life that felt right for me. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was mine, and that was enough. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, a thought crossed my mind. I was okay. More than okay, I was happy. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Because sometimes, the worst moments in our lives don't just break us, they shape us. They force us to grow, to let go of what's holding us back, and to make space for something better. And while I wouldn't wish what happened on anyone, I wouldn't change it either. Because it led me here, to this moment, to this life. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you for listening and being a part of this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please support us by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your engagement means the world to us. Comment your thoughts below. Tell us where you are listening from, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you in the next story.